Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our next Facebook Live event, our updated safety version. So per CDC recommendations, anybody, even asymptomatic people, are now required or recommended to wear masks when you are in situations with other people. So here we are today. My cameraman for the day is our Executive Director, Hillary Davidson. So her and I in the same room. I am wearing a face mask made quite expertly out of a shop towel. Thank you, Hillary, for that bit. So today we are going to be talking about big brown bats, or bats in general. I have with me Bruce. He's a very small ambassador. So periodically throughout this talk, I am going to ask that Hillary bring the camera in closer so that everybody can kind of get a better view of him, but we are still going to stay our 6 feet apart. Because he is a rabies vector species, even though he does not have rabies, for safety, I will be wearing gloves when handling him. So Bruce is our big brown bat. He has been with us since 2017. There are 1,200 different species of bat in the whole world. In the United States, there's about 40 species, and in Virginia, we have 16. Of those species here, in Virginia, the big brown bat is one of the biggest species, and there he is. We're going to try to give him a comfortable little cave to hide in while we talk. Here he is. So big brown bats are a colony species, and historically they have been a cave species. So we're going to have Hillary go ahead and do a little walk-up. He will have his eyes closed. It's very bright in here for him, and we did wake him up a little bit to be here with us today. So they are primarily nocturnal. They do spend most of their time awake at night, catching food and doing other bat-related activities. But for our nocturnal species here at the center, when it comes to doing programs, we do ask them to be out for a short period of time, potentially out of their more natural settings, but he is comfortable with that in the knowledge that as soon as we're done, he's going to go back in his cave area and be allowed to sleep for the rest of the day in his own time. So that's why we have our little cave for him to hang out in while we talk, so that he feels safe being this kind of exposed out with us. So he came to us as a full-grown adult, so we're not exactly sure how old he is, but he came, he was found on the ground and unable to fly, despite several months here in rehab and no obvious wounds or broken bones that may be causing him to not be able to fly. By the end of the summer, he had failed several flight tests and for whatever reason isn't able to fly, which makes him non-releasable. Bats are the world's only true flying mammal. So they're the only mammal that's able to sustain flight, so they're not gliding like flying squirrels. They are physically and actually flying. They do all of their primary activities on the wing. They hunt on the wing, they drink on the wing, and they even mate on the wing. So it's really important for these guys to have flight capabilities. Without them, they would not last very long. So that's why he's with us and not able to be released. So again, he's one of the biggest species that we have in Virginia. Don't let his size fool you though. Bats this size can eat up to 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in an hour. So they can eat a lot of bugs, a lot of insects overnight. Females will often, when they have babies, they have to eat at least their body weight in insects every night in order to sustain them and the babies that they're nursing. These guys can weigh anywhere between half an ounce to just over an ounce. So for these guys, it's anywhere between 14 and 20 grams. And for those of you at home, that's about a light bulb. The highest weight is about how much a regular incandescent light bulb weighs.
So we have a couple questions. One, do bats bite, and if so, when and why? And then another question came in about how does Bruce catch food if he can't fly?
Okay, so we'll do the food one first, since that's a shorter answer. So these guys can crawl. They have, if you've seen right here on the front, I should get a pointer. Right here in the front, you'll see one claw. So a bat wing is actually their hand. Guess it's not a shorter answer. It's their hand. So the thumb is the claw that you can see. It's open, it's free, it can move any direction it wants. And then the rest of the fingers make up the wing. There's webbing in between those fingers, webbing that attaches the pinky down to the ankle and across. So they're still able to crawl around. Just for him, what he does is we have a series of blankets that he can crawl down, he can crawl across the floor, climb into his short bowl and eat the insects that we give him, and then reverse that process. And since he's in a safe space where there are no predators and no other obstacles, then he's able to successfully find his food and eat it, which is not always the case for bats in rehab, because that coming down to the ground to eat food that's not flying out of a dish is a behavior that some of them just don't get. We do have to sometimes hand feed all the bats that we have during their rehabilitation. So the question about bats biting, yes. If the one lesson you take away from any and all of our Facebook Live events is the information that all wildlife can bite, and biting is an activity, a behavior that a lot of animals use to protect themselves. It's kind of the basic, easiest way to prevent yourself from being eaten. So bats generally will bite to protect themselves if they're grabbed, if they're handled, or if they're poked at in any way. They can use their very sharp, small needle-like teeth to kind of make their wishes known. He's hiding. So we'll see if he will let me show his wing. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. And if he chooses not to, we will let him take it back. So you can see, there we go, the long finger bones. This is his wrist right here. There's the thumb. I'm going to stretch my arm out so Hillary can come in. And you can see there the long fingers that make up the wing. And there on the back, his back foot, 5 free toes to move in any direction he likes. So that's why bats generally like to hang upside down, because they have more flexibility moving with those 5 back toes than they would trying to climb using just their thumbs, since that would be the only digit available on their front legs. So yes, all animals can bite, all bats especially can bite. In Virginia, they are considered one of the major rabies vector species. So those are animals that can harbor the rabies disease. So we always recommend for all wildlife, if you are attempting to rescue or contain or to try to help them in some way, to make sure you're wearing some level of protection, but especially for rabies vectors, to make sure that you talk to a licensed permanent individual before doing anything with these guys, so we can make sure that you are safe, they're safe, and we can help them when they need it.
And we have a question, Jennifer, about bats' eyesight. Do they have good eyesight?
Yes and no. So if you guys noticed when you came in, his eyes are very small. So they do have eyes, they can see. The adage of blind as a bat is not actually true. They are not blind. They have a fairly decent sense of sight, but it's not the sense that they use the most. You notice his very big ears. So ears, their sense of hearing is the biggest sense that they use to navigate the world. They also have a very good sense of smell. So for bats in a roost, they will use a combination of sound and scent to navigate, to know who's around, for mothers to find their babies. He's decided he's had enough. They hunt primarily by sound, and that's a term called echolocation. Is that better for you? He says he would like a break. Just let him hide for a minute. So they use their sound, their sense of hearing, to hunt. So they use something called echolocation, and that's where they release a very high-pitched sound wave. It's actually so high-pitched that we can't hear it. You have to use a special little device to catch their sound and then play it at a frequency that we can hear. So they send out this really high-pitched sound. It bounces off everything in the environment and comes back to them. And they can actually interpret with the way the sound has changed. They can build a 3D version of the world out of sound in their brain. So they can tell what the sound has changed to mean there's water over there, there's a tall something, probably a tree or rocks over here. And this is how they use, not only to avoid running into things when they're flying, but also to catch prey. So they will, in that sound, it will tell them if there are any insects, how big they are, how fast they're flying, in what direction, and they can focus in on one section, keep sending out this sound, keep tracking of that insect, that piece of food, until they catch up with it, and they can either grab it in their mouth or wrap their body around it to capture it and then eat it.
So Jennifer, Bruce is a male bat, but if he had a female friend, what would her gestation period be, and how would they raise their live young?
So again, there are colony species, but they will actually separate. So if he had a female friend, or for the bats that are out there right now, they actually mate in the fall and the winter, but the females don't get pregnant until the following spring. So they hold on to that, and they start their gestation period in the spring. And they'll actually, in the spring, separate. So the females will go and they'll start a maternity roost. So all the females in that colony, they either get to stay in their hibernation spot because it's the best one, or if there's a better place to raise babies, they'll move the whole colony. So all the females and the babies for that year hang out in the maternity roost. And then the bachelors will either sometimes roost alone, or they'll make their own bachelor pad somewhere else. Once the babies are born, it's only about 6 weeks from the time they're born to the time that they are able to fly and start hunting on their own. They'll start going out on short trips with mom and kind of learning. A lot of things, thankfully, are instinctual. So the fact that they need to hunt, how to use echolocation, things like that, are things they're born knowing how to do, and they just go out on these short trips with the rest of the females in their family to kind of see that in action, get some practice with that. But they do have that opportunity of coming back home and having mom bring them a meal if they didn't get a chance to catch it for themselves.
Thank you.
So,
are big brown bats endangered?
So big brown bats are not endangered, but there are several species of bat that are. Here in Virginia, we have 3 out of our 16 species are federally endangered. We also have 3 species that are of federal concern. So that is an issue. And one of the biggest problems for bats, besides the normal ones of habitat loss and other things, these guys have a very slow reproduction rate. So they will give birth to 1, maybe 2 babies a year, and they can live to be 20 or so years old. So they have a very slow replacement rate. So if something comes through that makes a lot of bats sick and they lose large chunks of their population, it can take them a very, very long time to rebuild that. So that's really one of the issues that we're facing. Bats here in the United States have been, for the last decade or more, have been fighting with a disease called white nose syndrome. That's a fungal infection that cave bats can get. So the fungus comes in when they are hibernating. So these guys go into a hibernative state called torpor when it's wintertime. And that's, they slow their body down, they lower their body temperature a little bit. They will wake up to drink occasionally, and they'll move around. Everybody will shuffle and make sure everybody's warm enough in the colony, but they don't eat over the winter. All the bat species here in Virginia and in the United States are insectivores, so they only eat insects. There are really no insects here in the winter, so these guys that we have, they will stay asleep the entire time, so they have to put on enough weight in the fall to make it through that winter. What happens with white nose is they don't feel well, they wake up midwinter, and in order to battle this fungal infection, they need calories. They need to eat, and since there isn't anything, they end up going out into the world looking for any food source that they can, and end up dying of exposure. So just getting too cold and not finding enough food and kind of running out of those calories within themselves. So unfortunately, that disease has wiped out several populations. It's killed millions of bats and kind of cleaned out these cave systems. So it's one of the big concerns that people have, because those populations that are gone could take hundreds of years to replace. And in the meantime, their main food source, those insects, are then those populations are allowed to expand, to explode, which can be devastating for other areas. Bats save farmers billions of dollars in pesticide use just by eating all the insects. So without their services, we could be using a lot more insecticides in our food, or losing that service.
And so we have a question regarding when do they come out to eat? Are they nighttime or daytime eaters?
So again, they are primarily nighttime. So that's when you guys see the most bugs out and about, the most insects. So these guys primarily are up at night. But when you've got babies to feed, as with a lot of other animals that we've talked about, when you have babies to feed, it takes you all night to feed yourself. You're going to need some extra time to take care of the babies as well. So it's not unusual to see these guys awake during the day in the spring and the summer, when they might be feeding another mouth or two. Some other bats, like the eastern red bat that we have here in Virginia, that's a tree bat. They can actually have up to 3 babies. Not all of those babies usually make it, but they can be sometimes supporting 3 babies. That's a lot of extra mouths to feed, a lot of extra insects to find.
So here's kind of a technical question. How do they get rabies? They are too small to be bitten and survive, so how do they obtain the disease?
It's an excellent question. I'm not really sure when the first one happened, because that is something that I've, always seen. A lot of animals, they're small, they get bitten by a rabid animal, it makes it difficult for them to survive, to pass it on. But the big problem for bats is if one bat gets it, they can give it to the entire colony. So again, they are colony species. They can have this particular species, can be in a colony of up to 300 individuals. And if one bat comes back to that colony having gotten maybe scratched by a feral cat that had rabies or has rabies, and it manages to survive, make it back to the colony, even if they don't ultimately survive, just that coming back to that colony can bring that disease into the colony. They bite a friend accidentally. A lot of these guys, when they're shuffling around, again, you're all clumped together. You want the prime nesting spot, the warm spot, and it does, you bite your neighbor to say, move over a little bit, give me some more space, and they can then pass it to that neighbor who passes it to another, and you end up with those problems. You have bats that then, one colony flies out into an area to feed, comes across another colony, they get into a fight, now that bat can take it back to his colony. So it kind of spreads bat to bat that way, and that's the issue, is one bat has it, he can give it to the entire colony, which is a lot of bats getting it at once.
Great. How about bat houses? Do they help with bat populations?
Bat houses can be great. We do suggest, if you like to have bats in your area, to hang it. The difficulty with bat houses is there's no way to convince bats to move into a bat house, especially if they already have a really nice hibernating spot that they use. It's really hard to say, oh, come move into this condo that I built for you. So a lot of bats, they're very specific about what direction it's facing, how high it is. You have to worry about sun exposure. Is the inside of the box going to get too warm? Is it going to be too cool? So these guys are very, very particular about the spots that they live in. So just kind of hanging a box on your barn is not really enough of a signal for these guys that you want them to move in. So they usually need to have a prime food source, a prime water source, and that box has to be kind of perfect conditions. So we do say if you have an interest in that, go ahead. There's some really nice ones that you can either find the plans for and build yourself. There's also some really nice ones that you can buy. I think the Bat World Sanctuary has a lot of information on their site for those. But for that, you just have to hang it and hope to keep moving it around, find the right spot. But you also have to make sure that bats are coming to your property. Unfortunately, they don't have bat real estate agents where you hang a box and they all get a message. So if you don't have bats coming to your property, they're not going to see that you've hung them a space to sleep. So making sure you have food and water sources for these animals are going to be kind of the first step. So you can see how nice and big his ears are. How furry. Have Hillary come in for another close-up. You can see his ears moving. Taking in all the sounds, his little nose is going.
Why is he twitching?
He's just taking in all the stimuli. This is a different room for him. So this is not the room he normally lives in. So there's new sounds, there's new smells, there's the turtle aquarium bubbling in the corner. So he's kind of taking in all that information at once. When he's moving his mouth like that, he could honestly be sending out that echolocation sound that we talked about. Well, we can't hear it, so we'd never know. We need to have that little contraption to hear it, to kind of translate it into a frequency that that our ears can pick up. So when he's moving his mouth like that, he could be making a noise, and we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So they can be very particular again about their spaces. Good job. But you did see those nice big teeth that they have. So again, insectivores, they generally only eat insects, but they do have a lot of teeth and it can be very sharp. If you come across a bat that you feel is in need, somehow he's on the ground or he's around your house, you're not sure what's going on, what it needs, we always recommend calling a permanent individual, whether it's ourselves or someone closer to you, to discuss the situation, and we can let you know what needs to be done and how to do it safely for you and that animal. No other questions?
Well, their lifespan.
Oh.
Coming back to their lifespan.
So back to their lifespan, they can live, they live a lot longer than you think. So a small mammal like this, kind of think mouse, live 2 or 3 years. These guys can actually live 20 or more years in the wild. A lot of them don't make it through their first winter because they're not so great at hunting that first fall, the first summer and fall. So they don't put enough weight on to survive their hibernation. But if they survive that first winter and get much better at it, again, they can live to be 20 or older in the wild. In captivity, obviously, he will live to be at least that. And we're not sure exactly how old Bruce is. He came in as a full-grown adult in 2017, so we know he is at least 3. But as a full-grown adult, he could be significantly older than that, since there's no way for us to tell once they hit adult size. There's really not a lot we can do to guarantee the aging, that he was really young or that he was really old. So we're just gonna have to wait and see for that.
How do bats fare in the city with so much noise and other distractions? How do they successfully hunt and live?
That's an excellent question. I'll answer it the best that I can. Obviously they do. They seem to do really well. I think it just might be a mix of growing up in those circumstances. They're able to kind of sift through those noises and kind of mix it into what they normally would hear. Obviously living out in the country is going to be a different set of circumstances. There's still noise, there's still light sources, there's still other animals, so they have to figure out those, and it can still be a disadvantage. So I would think city bats who grow up with that kind of information kind of already built in to their training and to their learning. So it's a lot that maybe their parents are more helpful for city bats and making sure that they understand that, you know, the light, the car coming at you might be something to avoid. Though again, unfortunately for wildlife, they don't really see cars as something to avoid. They're not often paying attention to those kinds of things. But in terms of kind of sifting through that noise, again, they have that high-pitched noise that they make themselves, that they're really good at picking through different sounds and categorizing them. So when they're listening, they can pick out their sound even from other bats. So their sound is a little more unique to them. So they can pick out, that's my sound that I put out that's coming back to me. So they can kind of, again, find their food source and avoid running into things. So I know all the movies of bats flying into your hair, they're not aiming for you, they're probably trying to avoid you, you're flailing, everybody gets confused in those situations. But they can tell that you're there, and they are definitely not trying to come at you. You're very big, and they don't want to tangle with you at all.
Okay, so we understand that bats eat insects. What eats bats? And do owls and hawks eat bats?
Yes, unfortunately for bats, probably everybody eats them. So yes, hawks and owls will eat bats. Other mammals will eat bats. Raccoons, foxes, pretty much that's the bad thing about being on the ground. So if you accidentally fall to the ground, it's very difficult. Bats, the way their wings are. So again, we mentioned that the thumb is free, the wing is the hand, and there's webbing that attaches the pinky to the ankle. So they're basically tied at their hands and their feet and then laid on their stomach. So they can't jump. They can pop a little bit, but they can't launch from the ground. So they have to get on a vertical surface, drop, open their wings, and take off flying from there. So bats that end up on the ground are at an extreme disadvantage and are open to predation that way. There's actually a really interesting story, I believe from South America, where hawks actually kept themselves, they trained themselves over generations to stay awake into the dusk hours, when they would normally be roosting for the night, because they found out if they hung out in front of this one cave right around dusk, all of these bats would come out, and that was a food source for them. So they traded the safety of going to sleep before dark with finding a good meal before dark. So even though it was harder for them to see, it was easier for them to catch prey because there's so many coming out of that cave at one time. So they were able to kind of train themselves and trade that kind of behavior. So they do go after bats a lot. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us for this talk about bats and for meeting Bruce. If you have any other questions, go ahead and send them our way. Again, please feel free to like and subscribe to our page to keep getting more of these live events as we make them. We hope that everybody has a great weekend. Stay inside and stay safe.